Karlsen, who is also here. In this project, we look at design practices in computational journalism, and we also look at the use of rhetorics as a bridge across interdisciplinary issues that emerge when people cooperate. At least in Norway, and I think generally in the literature, computational journalism is a collaborative field. And we would like to see how computational journalism can learn from design in order to create new and innovative things. So we go into this with an existing model in our head. We've done this before, and the result of that analysis was in the literature review we saw presented earlier this morning. But very simply, we used Aristotle's fourfold causality of artifacts, which breaks this craft of creating things into smaller pieces that we can identify and see that even though this is a very technologically oriented thing, so we can find stuff like define calls, the reason we do this, the accountability function of journalism. We have this always, this structured data thing. I would argue that could be other things, but we have the formal course with interactive storytelling that we have seen, etc. So this gives us a starting point to break it down. We also used the learning skills from Bloom, like this, to say that this contains different types of skills. We were interested in these skills when we started to figure out basically what to teach the students. But this idea of splitting this up into smaller pieces let us, for instance, split between applied programming, which is not always the main focus of many journalistic projects, but to introduce this idea of computational thinking, which gives us the programming in the abstract sense, which is very important and highly used. Of course, proficiency in investigative reporting, etc. This was our starting point, and we saw that these two theoretical frameworks together gave us a rather good description when we asked, when we traveled around and asked these newsroom, what do you do? How do you make? Who do you collaborate with? What's your job, basically? And this model, we were very happy with it. It's a good model, and we thought we had a rather good grasp of what's going on. So we were interested in taking this further, and we wanted to deal with uncertainty in data and how this is dealt with in the journalistic context. That didn't work. We'll talk about that. That's the wrong slide. Oh, here it is. This is the one up. Yeah, okay. So we took this model we had, and we were looking into sort of the advanced edge of this. We would like to see how the journalists dealt with uncertainty. So we took a data set that was produced by FIO, the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. They predict, based on the past, the conflict levels in various parts of the world. And we made a full-day workshop with journalist teams with some overlap of these newsrooms we have interviewed before. We gave them a very clear goal. We want to make data journalism out of this. But also this unclear bit, which was how do we deal with the uncertainty, statistical uncertainty, the many levels of uncertainties, and how should this be conveyed? How can it still be used in these potential futures in predicted data that we see a lot? And we sat down to analyze this and realized that our starting model is very good when we ask people, but when we sit them down and we tell them to do things, what we saw was quite different. So we turn this into a matter of figuring out what they did compared to what they told us. I skipped this starting point, so these ideas of rhetorics, which I'll come back to. But we use these rhetorics as a bridge, as a stepping, as a middle ground, and rhetorics as a way of analyzing various fields. These three are the ones we feel are most important to computational journalism. It's been applied to journalism by Shapiro. I think this is relevant as an example. This is also related to the ethics of journalism. He applies this to find sort of a way to quality assure the journalistic process. The rhetorics of design, which definitely relates to your presentation in the sense that we saw this also with the dead workers versus the football players, and this scrolling. This is, oh, sorry, forget I said that. Let's just say this is the idea of that designing things, making things is a way of making argument of how the world should be. We also see Karlsen and Joakim did this in a more product-centric way. And they looked at what kind of rhetorics are used in visualizations. The rhetorics of computation, or the rhetorics of procedure, which is what I meant, is very relevant to yours. This idea that how we interact with the object can also be a rhetorical frame, argumentative way of how we have to scroll past all these potential dead workers, for instance, or how the system makes some choices on your behalf. It gives you some agency to do things, but it also keeps some agency or keeps some choices for itself, as an idea of rhetorics of computation. Okay, so that was the backdrop. I skipped too quickly. So quickly back to what we saw versus what we knew. So this is a summary I made for journalists who will come tomorrow, a few years back. If we ask these most technologically savvy journalists, what should they learn, what should we do, what should we know, they give us basically business. It's a bit rounded off, but simple things. Learn Excel, have some database knowledge, a little bit of programming, know some stats, know how to make visualizations, and these more personal skills, like the ability to learn new tricks and the ability to solve problems. These are often technical problems, but still could be any problem. And this, of course, curiosity as a sort of a core competency. But when we look at what they did, when we put these journalists and designers and coders and researchers into one room and solve this problem for us, we saw very different things. We saw people trying things and failing and questioning and being humble to people who know more than them. We see demonstration of solutions and hypotheses tested. We see all these things that they didn't answer when we asked them. So then we sit down and say, well, this idea of computational thinking still fits. The idea of sort of this, you can take the same idea and say there is a journalism thinking, a logic or a rhetoric of journalism. These activities here, they match more closely what we see in design thinking. What did I say? Like what they teach in interaction design, but broader. In that I mean, this process is iterative and it contains a lot more. And it's also intended to be applied to other things than, for instance, human-computer interaction or product development. It can be applied to many other fields as well, and it's intended to do that. So what we see the journalists do is similar to this, but also somewhat different. This design thinking as a field is highly pragmatic. It's a process. And it's a set of techniques to solve design problems. So it consists of this process, which I'm sure you can translate to many other things. Among the things it does compare well with this, of course, the speech creation process from classical rhetorics, inventio, memoria, this type of knowledge creation. So we see some areas that doesn't match. We would like, of course, to say now our new composite model will be a perfect match. We just add design thinking, and then we have a perfect description that will be useful, and we can pinpoint what to teach our students or analyze for in our next paper. But some of these doesn't quite match. For instance, how users are seen. We did a follow-up interview with one particularly well-placed journalist to ask whether our new interpretation sort of works in his head, because we know he has control over one very large newsroom, and he also has friends in all the others. They will be here tomorrow. So we follow up, and this idea of audience as user in the audience in the head. We don't have users to test with or play with in the beginning. It's not a creative ball throwing things with fun activities with users. Users are not there, it's in the head. This also major difference is this idea of diverging and converging techniques to find solutions. These journalists, the journalistic practice is more close to either it converts into the story, or it's not the story and we just move on. There's also this element of evaluation and testing, where it's testing after product launch in journalism, but it's testing before a project is complete as part of the process in the scientific literature. So we end up with something like this. It's the process with a shot full of holes in the end. We lack bits. And this is, of course, super disappointing when you're trying to build theory, but it's very, very productive if you're trying to create computational journalism. These bullet holes or lacking pieces of the cheese here also represents areas where there is lots of potential for innovation and work to be done. For instance, by introducing both converging and diverging methods for finding these stories, to include the users earlier, which we learned in many fields, and also test these areas where you can sort of see as a low-hanging fruit for practitioners. So back to this rhetorics. We've seen it applied from various angles. We also see it in how, when we try to analyze what the people are doing in our workshop, what can they agree on? They can agree on things like finding a point of view of some basic elements that we do recognize from this three analysis of the three uses of rhetorics that we introduced in the beginning. So this idea of rhetorics as a common language, not only for practitioners, but also for us who try to study them, seem to us to be very useful, because this common language makes it possible for these people to work as groups, but also across groups. So we end up with this idea, with this imperfect model, where we have computational journalism as an addition of journalistic thinking, computational thinking, and design thinking, even though it's slightly flawed. We see the flaw as a potential for practitioners. And with that, I will stop.
Exactly within time limits. Once again, good work, all of us, actually. So, still some time for comments, questions. Nick?
So in the U.S., for instance, there are some educational programs that are starting to emerge that actually actively incorporate teaching particularly at the new school, where they have an undergraduate program, journalism plus design, it's called. Any thoughts on what your results mean for those kinds of models, or actively educating journalists to think in this way?
Yes, I think they are one step ahead of me, in the sense that this sounds like a very good idea, and I hope they also include some of these computational people. But yes, I think it's for data journalism and computational journalism, that doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. You can definitely apply this design thinking to old-fashioned newspapers on paper in 30 years ago. And I think that the model of design thinking would be applicable and useful, also without the digital computational data, whatever effects we add. So I think the school seems to have made a good choice.
These journalists, when they participate in the workshops, do they also see a need to work differently, or do they identify as goals? Or are they happy working in that field?
That's a good question. I would like to answer. I am not 100% sure. Joakim? Do the journalists acknowledge these goals? If we pinpoint them.
Like, they have designers on board, many of these teams that work within newsrooms. So of course, design thinking matches some of that thinking well, but the team as a whole, I guess it's the golden holes are there. It's different perspectives, and that's what we try to do.
Okay, so I don't know.
Yes, back there.
Like with one comment here, is that I think journalists do these things, but in a different way. They write text, then if the text is wrong, they write a new follow-up text. So actually they do ideate and prototype, but it's write a small news piece, and then they write a long piece. And in between, obviously, there's feedback. So I think a new thing in journalism is that you have to hold yourself back and wait to prototype or interactive piece. It's very unusual for journalists.
Yes, I think that's very close to what our follow-up interview basically said. That this audience in the head model is updated in between, but not as a part of the production.
Yeah.
So yes, but also no. But yeah, that's our understanding as well.
I was going to say, it appeals to me greatly, but within this, particularly because of the audience that you've chosen, we risk falling into some of the traps of collaborative design principles, don't we? Because we're not including the audience in this construction. So I'm just wondering whether you've got plans to think about moving the audience, putting the audience into some of these workshops.
I'll just note it down and do that next time. Sounds like a very good idea.
So journalists in this sense are moving away from the linear sort of, conception of news to sort of a feedback loop, but still without the feedback, because they're in the loop but not with the feedback.
Yeah, because it's not truly iterative, only slightly and very shortly because it's expensive, and so this idea of converging and diverging methods are cut off. Either it becomes a story quite quickly, or it's not a story. They can't afford to do as much trial and error as they would like. So this, although this model is intended to be iterative, the idea here is you've done the testing, then you reframe your question, and then you go back again, enough time until you're happy. What we observe is more closer to a linear process, and then there's this idea of updating mental models in between. So I'm not saying that it's actually changing to a more circular process or iterative process. I think in practice it's quite linear. But I think that again, that difference, the discrepancy between what we see and what this type of model says we should do, pinpoint spaces where you can very quickly get creative in doing more and other things.
All right, thank you. We will have a 15-minute coffee break right now.